Today's episode of Off the Timeline is titled How Washington Started the Super Conference Era. What if I told you that modern college football didn't start in 2014 and didn't start the playoff and didn't start in the South or the Midwest? What if the sport actually changed forever in Seattle in the mid 80s when Washington quietly decided geography was holding the sport back? This is an alternate history, but it's one that explains everything we argue about today: realignment, TV power, playoff access, and super leagues. Because in this universe, Washington doesn't just win games, they rewrite the map. Now let's set the table for why Washington had to move first. More, and because I know you're probably thinking to yourself, why Washington? They weren't the richest, they weren't the bluest of blue bloods. They weren't screaming for independence like Notre Dame. That's exactly why it worked. By the early 1980s, Washington had three problems. They were carrying national credibility for the Pac-10. They were boxed in the late TV windows, and they were paid like a mid-tier regional brand. USC flirted with independence. Oregon panicked. The Pac-10 stalled. Washington did the opposite. They planned, and yes, this is alternate history, but the incentives, well, they're very real. And that sets the table for 1984 and the year nothing happened. No championships, no fireworks, just meetings. 1984 is when Washington realizes the NCAA has lost control of television and that whoever moves first controls the future. And you may be thinking to yourself, wouldn't the Pac-10 stop them? They couldn't, because Washington never announced an exit, they announced a solution. A coast-to-coast Super League, shared revenue, national inventory. Washington doesn't burn bridges, they let everyone else realize the bridge is already cracked. And that sets the table for 1985, the sport breaks open. In 1985, the Continental Football Conference kicks off. Washington, USC, Notre Dame, and Penn State as the anchors. East Coast, West Coast, primetime, noon, late night. And you may be thinking to yourself, isn't the travel insane? Yes, and television pays for it. The audience doesn't see mileage. They see Washington versus Notre Dame in September. The Bulls feel immediately smaller. This is alternate history, but it's the first moment the national championship stops being accidental. And that sets the table for 1991 and proving it wasn't a fluke. 1991 matters more than 1985 because now Washington doesn't just architect the system, they win inside it, and unlike real life, this is a national championship that's undisputed. And you may be thinking to yourself, doesn't this just create another superpower? No. Because Washington doesn't dominate forever, they normalize access. This is the season where recruits stop asking who's the biggest brand and start asking, what's my path? That question changes the sport permanently. And that sets the table for the quiet takeover. By the late 1990s, the SEC consolidates, the Big Ten hardens, everyone else adapts or shrinks. Washington, they step back. And you may be thinking to yourself, why wouldn't Washington keep pushing for control? Because control invites rebellion. Governance invites survival. By 2000, Washington doesn't need to win every year. They already won the argument. This is alternate history, but notice how familiar everything feels. And that sets the table for 2020, the system gets tested. The pandemic season. In our real world, college football panics. In this universe, the Super Leagues coordinate, schedules flex. The playoff pauses, but does not collapse. Washington's not the loudest voice. They're the one everyone listens to. And you may be thinking to yourself, isn't this giving one school too much moral authority? Only if they abuse it. Washington never does, and that's why the system survives. This may be an alternate history, but it does explain why modern college football keeps drifting towards super leagues, because the incentives were already there. Washington just recognized them first. They weren't chasing dominance, they were chasing stability, and in doing so, they quietly changed the sport forever. If you enjoyed this alternate history, like the video, comment which school you think would have moved first instead, and subscribe for more deep dive what ifs that rewrite college football from the inside out. Because the best versions of history are the ones that almost happened.